Dean Obadallah. He wants to be your Muslim friend.
Most Muslims, I know many, are great people.
Watch this.
People.
You're listening to the Dean Obadallah Show, where comedy meets politics and all things in between.
And welcome back, Dean Obadallah Show. We're live Friday, June 28th. We're covering last night, the second of two debates. And in studio right now, our friend, an attorney. He writes for NBC.com. You see him on MS all the time. He also writes for CNN. It's the one, the only Raul Reyes. How are you, Raul?
I'm doing good, Dean. Doing good.
And you can also watch us on Facebook.com/Dean of Radio if you so choose. So, Raul, I have specific questions that deal with immigration policy. You write about a lot.
Okay.
But first, let me get your overall takeaway. 2 nights of debates. What are your, night one, let's do it easier.
Okay.
Wednesday night, what was your takeaway?
Wednesday night, just because of luck of the draw, I thought Elizabeth Warren did great, but in part because she was really the only top-tier candidate among that field. That shows she lucked out, and she's very good with her background as a professor, just standing up and giving policy ideals. So in this format, I thought she did great. To me, the runner-up was Julian Castro because, it's very risky to go a little negative or to punch above when you're introducing yourself, in a sense, to a lot of people, maybe for the first time. But he did a pretty good job, and Beto seemed very off guard. He seemed like he was off his game. If you just knew Beto from that, you would wonder, what was all the excitement about? So the first debate, I thought it was Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, and Julian Castro who did the best, for sure.
And last night?
Last night, Kamala Harris. Yeah, she was totally in command. I loved it when there was all that crosstalk and fighting, and she shut them down. Even if that line was planned,
it clearly was, but she delivered it well.
But
right?
she delivered it very well.
Here's a line that Rose talking about. Clip number 4, please.
Hey guys, you know what? America does not want to witness a food fight. They want to know how we're going to put food on their table.
It's definitely a line she did on the road or wherever, but she delivered it organically well.
In exactly the right moment,
right.
And, shut everyone down. And it was also interesting to me that there were a few times the second night, the people who were in the debate the second night, they had it easier because they knew what some of the questions basically were going to be, the yes or no questions, for example, and they were able to see how it played.
The format, especially. They understood that you interrupt if you want to get attention, they might call on you.
So that second night, I felt like everyone came a little more ready to play or to try and jump in and stand out. But still, it was very interesting to me that Kamala Harris, during that debate over this, I'm talking the second night, there were several times when it just got away from the moderators. Kamala Harris in that moment shut the whole thing down and got everyone to be quiet. So I thought that, and also when she brought up the busing and segregation with Joe Biden, which was probably the most memorable exchange of the night. And I know everyone is talking about that. And honestly, though, to me, I feel like Joe Biden should be thankful that she did, because you know what?
Why?
Until she brought that up, that woke him up. His answers seemed very, kind of phoned in, very mechanical. And all of a sudden, when she went for him, then there was a look in his eyes like, oh, crap, I need to get it together. And he, not that he did perfectly. He had an off night. But for sure, that was a wake-up call, like, you're not going to be coasting the way you think you might be coasting. So that is something I think in the long run will be good for him. And in a roundabout way, he should be thankful, because that's the first, but it's certainly not going to be the last time he hears those type of criticisms and those type of jabs that he's been kind of insulated from, because people feel very affectionate towards him, and he has all the Obama nostalgia. But,
it was interesting. I told people if they had not seen it, if you watch that clip, what I found very interesting, and I was watching it live, was that Senator Harris was talking about Joe Biden. He's looking straight ahead. But when he talked about the girl, he said the 2-year-old girl, and that girl was me, his head turned and looked at her. Even he was drawn in by the power of that statement.
That's what I mean.
And when he turned his head and looked at him, all of America had a feel, if you were watching it live, going, "Oh, this is serious stuff now. This is not just politics. This is something real. Right, this is very real." And he felt the realness of it when he turned and looked. I was like, "Wow!" The split screen was on, and he turned and looked. I'm like, "Wow!" Because usually you're looking ahead because you're trying to be slightly dismissive. You're like, "Okay, I get it." Like when Swalwell was like pass the torch type of thing, and I played Biden's response. He crushed Swalwell, and he sort of like dismissed him and goes, "I'm not giving up the torch at all."
Right, you're like, you're an upstart.
Who are you?
Not serious.
That one got him, and that touched it. And I think he was worried too. If you watch his eyes when the crowd was cheering her, something is up. And just to be clear, I don't think Biden is done. I think that a lot of America's learning about these candidates. Think about it. If you're not like us who listen here and follow politics closely like Raul, myself, and others, you don't even know who all these people are. You know, Biden, you remember that guy? Oh, yeah, he ran with Obama. And you remember some of the people, you've seen them in passing. America's being introduced 2 nights ago to 10 people. Many of them have no idea. Even after 2 debates, some of them, they have no idea what they're about because they had 5 minutes, some of them 5.5 minutes. So, but I want to ask you substantive stuff here.
Yeah.
I want to play the clip of Castro, not fighting with Beto, right before that.
Oh, okay.
About decriminalizing. And I think it's important. I want people to hear from a legal point of view what Julian Castro was talking about decriminalizing people crossing the border. So let's hear, this is from Wednesday night, clip number 15, please.
What would you specifically do?
Thank you very much, Jose. I'm very proud that in April I became the first candidate to put forward a comprehensive immigration plan. And we saw those images, watching that image of Oscar and his daughter Valeria is heartbreaking. It should also piss us all off. The reason that they're separating these little children from their families is that they're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them. Some of us on this stage have called to end that section, to terminate it. Some, like Congressman O'Rourke, have not. And I want to challenge all of the candidates to do that.
So Section 1325, tell us what that means right now. Like if someone crossed the border, explain all of us like 101 of what this is all about.
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting distinction, getting into some immigration law weeds,
Sure.
But the implications are huge. Now, just first of all, like just as a baseline, if you're here in this country without authorization, just your physical presence with no papers, you're undocumented, that is not a crime. It is a civil infraction. But if you get arrested, you can be deported.
So
now,
question.
that's presence. That's
right.
just being
so
here.
So 2/3 of people undocumented overstayed their visas.
Right.
They didn't cross the border. So they came from Europe, and they're like, I'm going to stay. I like this country.
Right.
That's not a crime.
So unless they are charged with something else or accused of something else, just the presence is a civil infraction.
Okay.
The difference is that people who cross the border without authorization, who cross illegally, and I don't mean asylum seekers, I mean people who just cross the border, that right now is a federal misdemeanor. It is a crime. Because it's a crime. Now this is where the distinction really matters. Because that's a crime, that criminality has been the basis for President Trump's family separations, because they can say for people who are crossing the border, well, these parents have to go to criminal custody. Therefore, we must take your children because we don't leave kids with criminals. So what Julian Castro is saying is that if we repeal that section, and that law has been in the books for say almost 90 years, but it only started being enforced during the Bush administration. For nearly 100 years, it was not a crime to cross the border. Now, if we were to do that, say we did it magically right now, and crossing the border was not a federal misdemeanor, it doesn't mean that people aren't going to be deported. You can still be deported. The difference is that you won't be also fined, you won't be also jailed, and you will not run the risk, as we've seen under this administration, of having your children taken away indefinitely or maybe even forever. So that's the distinction. What really made me happy in the debate that he brought this up in terms of a policy perspective. So often on immigration, Democrats are very timid.
Yes,
they're timid. They're afraid of being tagged with, that they're in favor of open borders, which is ridiculous because basically no matter what the Democratic position is on immigration, Republicans will say they're for open borders, no matter what.
Socialists.
So right.
So
that doesn't matter. But the thing is, generally, because Democrats are so timid, they start with a very, very centrist, so-called moderate position, and then it is moved over the legislative process and compromises very much to the right, and that's called a compromise. At the very least, I am thrilled that Julian Castro brought this up because to many people this seems like a radical idea, and maybe for right now, we don't know what the public thinks about it, maybe for right now it is, but at least he is bringing out a starting point that is a very progressive starting point, and he has most of the candidates on the Democratic side right now. I know Beto does not agree with it, but he has most of the candidates in favor of it. So maybe that won't, unless he becomes president, maybe we won't see that change to the law. But at least I have respect for him that he is staking out a very progressive viewpoint on this issue and saying, if we didn't have this law in the books, you wouldn't be able to take people's kids away. So that to me is a sign, is hopeful.
And once again, though, with this issue, like so many that progressives will advocate, it's nuanced.
Right.
And it takes explaining. in a way where Americans might hear, if they're not paying a lot of attention, hey, the Democrats don't want to make it a crime to cross the border, meaning we do want open borders, which that's not what it's about. So if you cross the border, you're just not charged with a crime. But if you're found here in America, you will be deported.
Right, and if you cross the border and it goes back to being basically a civil offense, you can still be deported. The government will just not have the ability, number one, to take your kids, and also if you come here, say illegally, and are charged with a crime, and then you are deported, that has implications for like the rest of your life because of now you have that criminal offense. You can be barred from entering the country from anywhere from like 10 to 25 to even more years. So someone maybe who tried to cross illegally as 20 and was tagged as a criminal, like maybe 30, 40 years from now, they can't come here or they can't, reunite with their family basically forever because of just the criminal charge. And so people will still be, can and will still be deported. The other thing that I really enjoyed about the debate, and this goes for all the candidates, including Marianne Williamson. You know what? No, don't laugh. Listen, when it came to immigration,
because you added it that way. She has 2 million Twitter followers.
Right,
she's got a lot of people out there who like her a lot.
She is who she is.
I'm not mocking her.
When this came to immigration, I just want to remind people we are so accustomed to this administration. Their rhetoric is so normalized that in the Republican debates, we heard so much talk about MS-13 and gang members and violence and the invasion and caravans and all this nonsense. At least in the Democratic debates, there was some differences in immigration, but people talked about the crisis in Central America. People talked about this 1325. People talked about family separation. It was actually a substantive discussion. And the reason I single out Marianne Williamson, because I know people think she's in La La Land or what have you, but even she, when she talked about immigration, she reminded people that part of the political situation in Central America is due to American foreign policy. And that is a legitimate point. And you don't hear any type of those things from the GOP. So it is a reminder, this is an issue that at least the Democrats can engage on it in a substantive and serious way. And I give every one of them credit on that.
I do. And I give a lot of credit to my listeners who have called over the last week, again, when we talked about this. America didn't just stop helping El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. We've destabilized regimes in Central America
for decades. That was the point that Williamson was making.
And that's a great point, that we have played a role. So we caused these problems. Now they're fleeing up here because their countries are destabilized. They're corrupt, and because of America wanted to have control over them. And I've had people call me and tell me this more and more. Right. I've been researching. I'm like, wow.
And also, even more recently, starting in the 90s, we deported massive numbers of MS-13 gang members to those nations. And then we're surprised when the gangs, sort of multiply, and now many of them are involved in trafficking and smuggling, or even coming back to the U.S. stronger than ever. So we do have a role in those countries.
So let's talk politics here, and not that I'm demanding you to be a Democrat. No, I'm not demanding you to be a Democratic strategist. But if you were talking to Democrats out there who are now seem to be embracing the idea of decriminalizing crossing the border, how do you think? Just top of your head here, obviously, I'm just throwing this on you. How do we articulate it in a way that shows it's about compassion, but it's still not open borders, that people get that?
I think you just have to emphasize it is still about the rule of law, that even with decriminalizing illegal entries, people can and will still be deported. Crossing the border illegally, unless you have some type of claim, for refugee status or asylum, you will be sent back. It might depending on what your claim is, that it goes through the due process in our system, but that we will still have removals of unauthorized immigrants. So I think that's a distinction that Democrats need to make, and I think they have to make it very hard, because Republicans always say
they're going to make
open borders. It's open borders. Right. And I think for someone like Beto, he's from a border state, who's from El Paso, I predict that he is going to sort of flip-flop or adjust himself on this position, because it's hard to sustain that when you are from El Paso, which is kind of like ground zero for these horrific pictures and the terrible treatment of kids that we've seen in these facilities. So,
and Jorge Olivares, who hosts on this channel on Saturdays but filled in, and he's from Texas, from El Paso, right near that area. And I said to him how stunned Beto was when Julian went after him. He goes, yeah, because Julian campaigned with him running for Senate.
Yeah.
He was out there the entire state, and all of a sudden his buddy turns him on national TV. And that's why now it made more sense why Beto looked like a deer in the headlights. All of us, that's his good friend did to him on national TV. And that's life. This is politics. And it was a policy thing. It wasn't a personal, it wasn't like, and you slept with my sister. It was about policy. And you can call him out. Although I'm sure Beto would be like, why didn't you just talk to me before? Why'd you have to do it like that? And it was very effective.
And it was not only effective, but I mean, it was a real real risk because when you're going after someone, especially like we said in this introduction type of format, it is very risky. If you go too hard, you come across as someone who's trying to be a bully or just trying to get attention. Someone like, for example, Bill de Blasio, to me, with all the interruptions, he did not come off well. Kristen Gillibrand, with so many interruptions and trying to jump in, did not come off well. So it's a risk. But I felt like Julian Castro did play it. He, maybe it was just luck, but he did play it well. And Beto was so stunned that Julian was really able to pressure him and knock him off the game.
So I want to get, because Raul speaks Spanish, I want to play a quick clip here. Beto, Booker, and Castro. And just, can you translate what the hell they're saying? No, I know what they're saying. I'm kidding. But I just want to play this and see what you think of their Spanish. Obviously, Julian sounds great, but I don't know. I want to get your reaction. Here's clip number 17, please.
Necesitamos incluir cada persona en el éxito de esta economía. Pero si queremos hacer eso, necesitamos incluir cada persona en nuestra democracia.
La situación ahora es inaceptable. Este presidente ha atacado, ha demonizado los inmigrantes. Es inaceptable. Voy a cambiar este.
Me llamo Julián Castro y estoy postulando por presidente de los Estados Unidos. The very fact that I can say that tonight shows the progress that we have made in this country. And on January 20th, 2021, we'll say adios to Donald Trump.
I love that last line, adios. So who spoke Spanish the best, would you say?
Well, you know what? I would say out of those three clips, definitely the worst was Cory Booker, because that is like, to me, I hear that sounds like someone who was told, you must memorize these lines. Here's the gist of it. And he did. That's why it sounded a little stilted, a little awkward. Beto, when you hear him, that's a fluent Spanish speaker. In fact, I would say that if I were right here with Beto, his Spanish is probably better than mine in the sense that he could talk about things like the primary or maybe like foreign policy or domestic policy in Spanish in a way that I couldn't. My own Spanish is probably the closest to Julian's, and the caveat I want to put around that is I would say both he and I are what, in the Latino community or in Mexican-American community you would call pochos, which is sort of, it started out as negative, but now it's just a term. It means like basically you're an assimilated...
What's the word?
Pocho.
With a B or a P?
P-O-C-H-O.
Pocho.
It means you're an assimilated Mexican-American. So we can speak Spanish, but anyone who is really from Mexico or someone who maybe with an immigrant heritage in Latin America, they know after 3 words that we were born here. It's just like the accent you cannot shake. And he's talked about it, So I would say he and I are both like Pocho Spanish speakers.
I look forward to the day when someone says like, Marhaba ana Dino Bidala, Abui Palestini, one day, no, like, and the whole thing with an Arabic accent and just freak out people. By the way, so what was your reaction? Some people called in yesterday and didn't like that not Julian, but Beto or Booker were speaking Spanish on Wednesday. They called in yesterday about that. What's your reaction?
It didn't bother me so much, but it was a very interesting a reaction. Sort of like there's like a generational divide, I would say, in the Latino community. The older generation, people like my parents, people who are seniors now. They still like it because they can remember back in the day where a candidate speaking Spanish was at least just a basic acknowledgement that we existed. Sometimes that's all we got. Right. Now, the younger generation, like they are hip, they are here. They don't need anyone's permission. They hear someone speaking Spanish to them and they feel like, they call it hispandering. That's actually a term. Hispandering. It's like, you're not going to win us over with that. We want issues, we want to talk about policy, and don't think that just because you're Latino either, that we're going to give you a pass. So it was kind of divided in the U.S., but what was very interesting to me in Spanish language TV, like on Univision, Telemundo, and in Latin America, it really went over well because there they saw it like, these candidates respect us. These candidates are including us. We are finally at the table. So it was mixed in the U.S. and in Latin America and on Spanish language media. It was very, very positive. So that to me shows there is still some room for it. And I think if nothing else, someone like Cory Booker, who maybe is not going to get a lot of attention on Telemundo because he's not Latino and he's not in the top 3, that got him attention across all Spanish language media. So it still is, in that sense, is effective. You get free media in all these big cities. In many big cities, the Univision newscast outranks the local news. So that's very important.
If someone wants to connect with a Spanish-speaking audience or people of Spanish heritage or Hispanic heritage, and they speak a little Spanish, but the accent is horrible, but they're giving it an effort. Do you think people, because I've been at Muslim events where politicians come up the most white bread and they can't even say salam alaikum. They say it like salami alaikum.
I think
and
people generally
and we
feel
kind of
like,
laugh. I'm like, okay, but you made the effort. Like no one
Yeah,
goes
you tried.
like the person wasn't trying to pretend they weren't like as it says in the Quran, they weren't doing that. That would be a bit much. But they would try to say salam alaikum and they would say it with an accent that was just horrible. And you're like, what are you saying?
Yeah, it's tricky because, the other thing is like authenticity is it's like a fine line. Sometimes people give you credit if you just say a few words. To me, Cory Booker kind of pushed it because he was trying to say sentences I'm not sure he completely understood, like the grammar of what he was saying. And I remember 4 or 6 years ago, whatever it was, when Hillary was running, the campaign put out something at one point saying, Hillary is just like your abuela, trying to be cool in that way, meaning grandma. And there was all these Latinos, especially the millennials, who said, look, whatever she is, Hillary is not like our abuela. So it's a fine line. It's very subjective.
It is a fine line. It always is. All right, let's take a quick break. Come back with our friend Raul Reyes to talk about the Supreme Court decision on the census. Also, Ken Cuccinelli, that asshole. I usually don't curse, but he's just terrible. We'll talk about, he's part of the Trump administration. He blamed the father who died. We saw the famous picture that went viral this week with his daughter. Blamed him for the death. And, of course, won't take no responsibility in the Trump administration for what they're doing. So let's take a break and come back. You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, where we crush Trump's lies every single day.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
And now, more of the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show, Friday, June 28th. We're here with our friend Raul Reyes, attorney, writes for NBC, also CNN.com. So, first of all, you wrote an article for CNN Today about Ken Cuccinelli, who is the acting director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So what did he say about the 23-year-old father who drowned with his daughter? Explain to us a little bit about
No, terrible. Ken Cuccinelli, first of all, I mean, I don't like to pass judgment on just a whole person, but Ken Cuccinelli is horrendous. I mean, he has a very homophobic, anti-LGBT background. He's very anti-immigrant. He's talked about the invasion and called immigrants animals. I mean, and Republicans don't like him either, honestly. He's not just someone...
Trump likes him, though. You point to him.
But he could never get confirmed because many Republicans, including McConnell, do not like him. He's a very divisive person. But basically, he was asked about this photo that really shocked the whole world of this father and daughter who drowned trying to cross into this country after they had applied for asylum but were kept in Mexico because of this metering policy that the Trump administration is illegally conducting. And his response was basically like, well, it was their free will that they decided to go, try and attempt this crossing, and therefore he basically said it was their own fault that they did this. Although they would not have been moved, it was the desperation. They had come to the U.S. at a legal port of entry and applied for asylum, and then they were just waiting in Mexico. And remember, northern Mexico is extremely dangerous in terms of the gangs and cartel activity. It is not a safe place to hang out and wait.
Right.
But they were so desperate that they attempted this crossing, and it was very tragic consequences. There was a time, I mean, no administration is going to go condone unauthorized entries or attempted unauthorized immigration. But there was a time where it was normal for any administration to at least express sympathy and condolences for a tragedy.
Not this one.
But not with this one. And sad to say, I was not surprised with this Ken Cuccinelli at all.
I mean, one of the currencies of Trump, and I say it all the time, is cruelty.
And dehumanization.
Right, dehumanization. And dehumanization is so insidious, it allows you to do anything to them, because if you buy into Trump's view, they're all about an invasion in force. They're all gang members or thugs. And there's a reason why, and I made the point on the show, that for 10 years, up until last September, not one migrant child died in U.S. custody. In the last 8 months, 6 have died. And to me, that's because Trump...
42 adults.
And 42 adults. Highlighting the kids because none had died, but the idea that Trump dehumanizes them to the point where even those who are caring for them they might be sneezing or crying, and they go, who cares? They're the child of someone who's bad anyway. They're a thug's kid or something, because this is what Trump's painted the picture.
In fact, I believe it's Thomas Homan, who's the acting head of ICE, has said he has seen these children. I think it was Homan who said he has seen these children. Now, he's talking about kids, and he looked in their eyes, and he knew that someday that they would be future MS-13 gang members. So
why would you care?
That's the level of official dehumanization, and that's a critical point. As a country, as they go towards autocracy, is dehumanizing a group of potential victims. So you always have that scapegoat, to point as an excuse for not being able to solve problems.
And if you wonder how, when you look through the history of the world, how these horrific dark moments happen that are stunning, it's incremental. It's not overnight.
Right.
So you dehumanize a group of people, and then you can commit a genocide on them, or even a Holocaust, but a genocide on them, and it's happened around the world, not just with the Nazis, in other places as well. You dehumanize them, and then no one thinks anything about killing them or their children or watching them die. You don't care.
And I have to say, and this is in terms of, say, the mainstream media, which, as we both are, we are a part of it. I even see that in the way the media covers this, because the media presented this picture that went viral all over the world as undocumented immigrants, which is technically correct, but you could just as easily say these were asylum seekers.
Right.
Now, there's a big difference in people's mind when you talk about quote unquote illegal immigrants versus asylum seekers and refugees, and that's what these people were. They had, they were waiting in Mexico for their claims to go through the procedures. But just that terminology that we have now accepted because of this Trump era that we live in, even that itself is dehumanizing. They were asylum seekers.
And you know what, when you talk about Ken Cuccinelli and how it's stunning to you and to us and to listeners about that he would blame the father without showing any kind of compassion or concern. I've had Trumpers call me. I've had emails from them. That's what they're about. There's a lack of compassion or caring that is so alarming to me, because I understand it's not just about that person. It's the way they view brown people in general. And so that Trump can say anything or do anything to them, and they're not going to care. They're always going to defend Trump and these harsh policies.
And on that point, just to jump back to the debate for a moment, one of the things that also jumped out to me, which I thought was sort of, it was not covered enough by the press, not highlighted enough in all the debate roundups and talking about the debate, is when Pete Buttigieg made the point that to all the people who identify themselves very proudly as Christians,
yes,
if they are not offended by family separations and children dying at the border, he said, then I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said, then you are hypocritical. You have no right to call yourself, a Christian and take on that mantle if you can't express just basic common compassion and decency towards fellow human beings. And I thought that was a very solid point, but there was so much going on over these two debates that it wasn't highlighted.
That was a
enough.
great point, but that was one of the great points in the debate when I watched that moment. So let's talk about the Supreme Court decision yesterday on the census question, and just remind people, sort of in a nutshell, what did Trump want to do with the census
Well, the
question?
Trump administration, they wanted to add a citizenship question to the census, knowing full well that it would depress turnout among Latinos, especially immigrants, because the census is supposed to count all people. That's in the 14th Amendment. They wanted to add this citizenship question because they knew that it would depress that type of turnout, thereby
so less
favoring
people who are Hispanic perhaps might fill out the question.
Right, and not just undocumented people, but anyone maybe who lives with someone who's undocumented
mixed status
or has
family.
mixed status family, someone whose father or mother is undocumented. They knew all this. All of the researchers and the analysts at the Census Bureau advised against doing that for this reason. 6 former heads of the Census Bureau, Republican and Democrat, told this administration, don't do it. It will mess up the census. They wanted to do it anyway. And
the last time it was done was 1950. So just
right.
like it wasn't present, it wasn't current day. They made a decision out of the blue all these years later to suddenly do this.
Yeah, gee, why?
And by the way, so if the responses were depressed, and they're talking about millions of, they estimate maybe 6 or 7 million less people would have responded, then the result that impacts.
Then that would favor Republican, rural America, smaller cities. It would disfavor blue states, some large metropolitan areas that tend to be more Democratic, and it would depress, the representation
in Congress,
of
because we have less
Hispanics.
people, right?
Yeah, for sure. So the good news is that the Supreme Court did not allow this to go through for now, but that the fight is really not over, because they're basically. It's hard to look at it like as this great victory for the law or justice, because what Roberts said, he did in a sense call out the Trump administration. He just said, like, the reason you had for adding this question, you haven't given us like a credible reason. It seems, I think he used the word contrived.
He did. I'm reading some of it right here.
So basically, he's in a sense giving and he sent it back to the lower courts. But basically, if the Trump administration can scrape together any anything with a shred of credibility, like half-ass type of excuse, maybe they will let it go. So it was great news. And, so we have to appreciate that and celebrate that. But it's still like they're giving them almost a second chance. Like, don't you have anything else to say?
But at the same time,
because
maybe
the
on a
origins of
practical
the question
matter,
are so shady.
Right. And from a practical matter, if they had anything better, they would have probably advanced it already. And maybe he's just trying to save face with conservatives. I'm not sure. But in the language that Chief Justice Roberts wrote the decision, so he joined with the 4 progressives on this issue. And talk about Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, who advanced this and wanted this issue up there. And the reasoning he gave it, and Roberts wrote that there has to be a genuine justification for important decisions. It can't just be essentially arbitrary and just a random willy-nilly, like just throw it in there. We're going to do this. And the reasons they gave, as Chief Justice said, they tell a different story that does not match the explanation the Secretary gave for his decision. So they were seeing the real world. In this case, they saw the real world. In the Muslim ban a year ago, they didn't see it. They
right.
literally ignored the language of Donald Trump demonizing Muslims during the campaign, and they actually said it's not relevant to this determination. In this case, they actually look at the real world.
A little bit. But that's why I say, like, we can't get too excited. I mean, just like, when we talk about the Muslim ban, all the lower courts were against it, ruled against it, but the Supreme Court allowed it. This time, for whatever reason, all the lower courts had ruled against adding the citizenship question, and Roberts decided that it would just be maybe a bridge too far to allow this. So it's good news for now. What is very curious for me is the Trump administration has emphasized that the fact that this even got to the Supreme Court so quickly was because of the urgency of the July 1st deadline. Now that the decision did not go their way, they're saying, well, maybe we could do it by October. And Donald Trump has even said, well, maybe we'll just delay it altogether until they can come up with some type of reason. But my sense also in terms of the real world, there's so much shadiness that went into the adding of the citizenship question. The people who were for it, and this is what has come out in the lawsuits and the email trail, the people they did consult, and remember, they ignored the Census Bureau experts. They did consult Steve Bannon.
Yes.
They did consult
Thomas
Chris
Heffler.
Kobach.
Chris Kobach.
Right, and there was
Thomas
this GOP
Heffler, who's a Republican
operative.
strategist, who said that it would be advantageous to Republicans and non-Hispanic whites to add this question. And they learned about this late in the process. And by the way, the idea of having a census every 10 years is actually mandated by Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution and codified by the 1954 Census Act. And Trump tweets, I'm going to have the lawyers look into it, and maybe we could sort of, he didn't say this, but he's saying we can see if they can delay it. So Trump is literally tweeting yesterday, I'm going to see if my lawyers can suspend the United States Constitution because this is not good for Republicans. What's going to change him saying, let's suspend the 22nd Amendment, meaning I can serve a third term? If you're going to throw that up there, and no one on the right even pushes back. There's not even like, there's Trump again suspending the Constitution. Stand up for something. They stand up for nothing. They stand for nothing, the GOP.
Right. So, I mean, that type of enabling is totally disheartening. What I do have a little confidence in is in just the last few months as this case has gone on, there was so much unearthed in terms of the paper trail and this GOP operative, Hefferman, I think his name was.
Hoffler, Thomas Hoffler, Hoffler.
Things like that is that I think maybe over the summer even more stuff will come up. So it'll be even harder to overlook all this, like all the political maneuvering that has gone into adding this census question, adding the citizenship question. And even that, it's just shows where we are as a nation, and in really a dispiriting way, that something as basic as the census. When has the census ever been controversial? It's, you just everyone wants to be counted. That was once a universal, something that we all accepted. Only now in this administration, they have weaponized it to try and use it against Latinos, immigrants, Democrats, people from blue states. And I also want to remind people that if we do have a census undercount, even if you're not Latino, Hispanic, or you're not an immigrant or undocumented or anything like that, it still hurts us. For example, like if you live in New York City, a census undercount hurts us because we'll get less money for the school system, for all sorts of social service programs, because undocumented people who might be here and Latinos might not respond. So it hurts citizens as well, the undercount, not just Hispanics and immigrants. It hurts the country.
And again, the last time it was on the census 1950. So even Republican administrations after that, they did not add it because they wanted to find out everybody here, and they maybe even didn't think it was important, that question, but Trump did, and we know what Trump is about. He's shown himself to us. So let's take a quick break, come right back with more of our friend Raul Reyes after this. At this point, the question is not who connected to Donald Trump is a criminal. The question is anyone connected to Donald Trump who's not a criminal?
The Dean Obeidallah Show. Sirius XM Progress. You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live Friday, June 28th. In studio here, our friend Raul Reyes. So, Raul, let's talk about, we learned today that the Supreme Court's taking up the DACA case. So it's not now, folks. The term is essentially over for the court, but this is for the next term. So remind people a little bit what happened with DACA, because DACA deferred deportation of younger people who came here with their parents. And we talked
the Dreamers.
The Dreamers. Right. What led to a court decision? Like, what did Trump do? Just remind people.
Well, basically, things were cool with DACA. It was protecting young people who had grown up here, who were productive citizens, productive people who had passed the background checks, and that there was a big objection to their presence. But what Trump struck it down, I want to remind people about this. Trump struck it down because his reasoning for getting rid of DACA was the threat of a lawsuit from Texas. It wasn't even an actual lawsuit like we had with the Affordable Care Act, where states sued the Obama administration. It was just the possibility of a lawsuit that he said, because of that, we must end it. And Jeff Sessions came out and ended the program. So since then, if you have DACA already, courts have upheld it in California, in Washington, and Virginia, all around the country. They've basically upheld it. But it's sort of, the DACA program is sort of like in this in-between zombie, I call it the zombie status. If you have it, you can renew it every 2 years, but people like who come of age and who otherwise would have qualified can't get into it.
Oh, so new people can't.
So it's like something if you have it now, it's good, but and you
it's about
can renew
800,000 people last I saw that are in this.
So that's where it is now, and they pressured the Supreme Court to take it up. And the thing is, the Supreme Court will take it up next term. Probably will get oral arguments around this time, which will be 2020, and I think originally people maybe a year and a half ago had this fantasy like, well, because the Supreme Court will rule on it, that will lead Congress to get its act together and we'll see bipartisan, some type of bipartisan. Right? But now that is totally ridiculous, since there was a time when Republicans did support the DREAM Act in the House, and there were some in the Senate, but no more, not with this president. So it's a very dangerous situation because the Supreme Court, they could well strike it down. Just from a legal standpoint, though, the reason why some courts around the country have upheld it, including in Texas, where it's the conservative circuit, is because part of striking it down as unconstitutional is to show that these states would be suffering like harm from the existence of this program. But now that it's been around since 2012, what harm has happened from DACA? You see young people who can work and who can drive and contribute to the country. So that's a harder case to make. It was different like with the Affordable Care Act when it hadn't gone into law yet, and you could argue all these doomsday scenarios. But this, DACA is in place, so the idea of them being able to prove like some type of imminent injury or harm to the states that's a high hurdle to clear. But we don't know with the Supreme Court. Like we were just talking about, they upheld the Muslim ban. So they can do this conservative, this very right-leaning court could well strike it down.
And to remind people, DACA was created by President Obama by executive order. So the argument is that it has to be by legislation, not by executive order. Meanwhile, Trump's done everything by executive order. It's like a joke that he's calling out something as being unconstitutional. I can't even imagine. I don't know if you know many DACA recipients. I've had some on the show in the past, but not recently. I should get them back on. They're living their life in limbo. You can't even plan, because they could be, if the Supreme Court next June, because it'll come down at this time, the decision, the end of the term, in all likelihood, unless they punt, and they'll say, okay, if they rule against the kids and rule for Trump, DACA's over, meaning they're undocumented immigrants without protection.
And they are at risk at deportation.
At any moment, they could be deported.
And in the eyes of the Trump administration, they might as well be a member of MS-13 or a cartel or drug smuggler, because to the Trump administration, all undocumented people are hardened criminals. That's the thing. But it's also a hard way to live, because DACA goes in 2-year renewals. Like, say if your renewal is up right now, it's pretty cool that you feel safe. Like, well, my renewal will get me through, say, 2 years of at least when the Supreme Court would rule. Other people are making the calculation, depending when the renewal comes up, that should I wait a few months or do it on the last day? Because what if their renewal is up, say, like in April, and they have that stage where they could fall out of status, where they could be at risk, depending on what the court how the court rules. So it's all this like juggling that people are doing with the time frame. And these DACA kids also suffer from the fact, just from what's going on in the country. There was a time when DACA and the Dreamers really were at least a priority for the country, in terms of what we saw in the news. Their stories were everywhere. They were coming out. But now, with this administration has moved us to a place where we are worrying about young children dying in cages. It's harder for DACA people, they're college grads, so they serve in the military, to even get the attention of the media and remind people they are still here, because in the scheme of priorities, they're not dying at the border. So it just again goes to show how this administration has moved the ball in terms of what is deemed important enough for us to care about. And the worry I have about the Supreme Court, they've done this before, is John Roberts could very easily go with a decision that basically said, well, we believe this is something that can and should be settled by Congress, therefore we'll strike it down and Congress can handle it, knowing full well Congress will not handle it, and all these young people will be at risk for deportation, most of them to countries that they have no history with since they grew up in the United States. So
I can't imagine what they're going through.
Very disturbing.
And how do you plan your life? And you sit around and you don't. And Raul's point is so important, because I had some DACA recipients on who said they came here at 4 or 5. They haven't been back to say it was Mexico they were from originally. Since then, they have no connection. They know nothing. Some don't even speak Spanish. You read the stories. And then we would literally throw them over the border. I wonder if the Supreme Court will do something where they strike it down, but on some level, those in the program, there's some protections for them. It won't be for new people. Something sort of like
it's a scary time for undocumented people, obviously, but also for immigrant families, because just think about this. On one hand, we're telling all the advocacy groups are telling Latinos and immigrants, no matter what, participate in the census. You must be counted. Do it. It's very important. Right. This is for our community. At the same time, they're putting out the message that if ICE or someone from the government comes to your house, don't open the door. Don't talk to them. You don't have to. You know your rights. And that's true. But you see the conflict like there? Like, should you trust the government or should you not trust the government? And especially for immigrants, it's really all the same. And I don't blame them, because if I were, say, a DACA grantee, I don't know how I would sleep at night knowing that this government had my name and address and all my information about my family members when they're conducting mass ICE raids. Because just, for example, if you're a DACA grantee, just that could put your family members at risk who are undocumented. So it's a very scary situation for them, and it's so unnecessary.
And did you hear from any people in the community when they were about to start those mass deportations?
Oh, of course.
What was going on then?
No, people all over the country were it's very frightening. It's hard to even imagine that type of fear that you have especially because mixed status families are so common. They're like I think there's something like 4 million U.S. citizen children who live with a parent who's undocumented. There's about 5 million U.S. citizens, young people, who live with a family member who's undocumented. So what do you do when ICE shows up at your door and this government does collateral arrest, meaning they'll arrest anyone who's there, which is different from the Obama administration, where they had a lot of deportations, but they would go for the person they were looking for.
So people get scooped up. I've heard about this in the net.
So if you happen to be there, you will all be taken away if you can't prove your citizenship. And that opens the door for rampant racial profiling, by the way, of Hispanic citizens. And we've seen that. People are taken to detention. People are taken away in these raids, and they have to prove that they are citizens. It's the burden of proof falls on them to prove. And there have been a lot of lawsuits about that they're citizens because of this administration.
All right, so let's take a quick break. Come back with our friend Raul Reyes right after this.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show, Friday, June 28th. Raul Reyes, our buddy. By the way, coming up in the third hour, our weekly segment, What Just Happened? Tonight we have 3 comedians. That's right, 3 to increase the humor. But Raul, I want to thank you, my friend, for coming in. It is, we were talking in the break, it may be too simplistic, but with Trump, it's all about demographic threat, making a base happy that's fearful of change. It is white supremacy at its essence, and literally in the sense of wanting to keep white people superior to make his base happy, maybe to make him happy. And it's a dark day for this country. We're going to look back at that. I think we're going to look back at this time and go, what the hell was going on in America? Sort of like the Red Scare or Yellow Peril, all these things through time. You're like, what happened? So, Raul, thanks very much. You're on Twitter at Raul A. Reyes?
At Raul A. Reyes.
So,
yes,
Raul,
sir.
Thank you very much for coming in. Folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to come back with our What Just Happened segment right after this on the Dean Obadala Show.